Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Osterhout, the executive producer here at Lincoln Square, and I'm joined every week by Andra Watkins from the Substack for such a time as this. Andra, how are you?
I'm great today. How are you? How's everybody?
Doing good. I feel like the last weekend, the long week sort of dragged out. We had a snow day during the week, and then a late start to school. It just feels like the holiday season is just really crashing in right now. It's like really happening. People are, happier, a little checked out. It's kind of nice.
I have my twinkle lights going all the time.
Oh,
So
that's nice. Oh, that's good. Well, uh, Twinkle Lights is a good way to start our conversation today because everyone out there, usually this conversation revolves around all of the darkness and doom and everything that is going wrong in our world because of the white Christian nationalists who are at the head of our government currently. But last week, Andra had an amazing piece on her Substack about all the things that aren't going wrong. Is that they're not exactly going right, but let's talk about this. Project 2025 had a very specific list of items and objectives that they wanted to accomplish, right? Can you tell us about just first the overarching big picture plan that these white Christian nationalists, Russell Vogt, and all of these people had in mind when Trump was inaugurated on January 20th? What was the big vision?
well, for some backstory for people who haven't heard this before, Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership was an initiative of the Heritage Foundation, which started in 1973 and published their first mandate for leadership in 1979. So, and every 4 years, they would publish another one. And if they got a conservative president, they would implement 50 to 70% of that vision. But Project 2025 was something different. After the current president didn't win the election in 2020, they really doubled and tripled down to figure out what they needed to do to transform our government from a democracy to a Christian nationalist theocracy in one Hail Mary, one fell swoop, if the president managed to win the election in 2024. So they started working on Project 2025 after the 2020 election. They published it in 2022. And I started reading it in 2023 and covering it in early 2024. It is a 180-day plan to transform the government from a democracy to a Christian nationalist theocracy. It was very ambitious, very aggressive. So they hope to be done with this transformation by or around July 20th of this year. And while they've managed to do a lot of it, they've only accomplished about 48% of what they set out to do by July 20th.
By the way, July 20th is the anniversary of the moon landing.
Yes.
It's like their moonshot. It's so cringy.
Yes.
Oy.
Yeah, so according to the Project 2025 tracker that I linked in that piece, they aren't even 50% done. Now, they rank it by department. So some departments like USAID are 100% done because they've accomplished everything they wanted to with that department. But some departments they haven't even started yet or are only 10% done.
Mm-hmm.
So the upbeat piece of this is, while it's horrifying to watch what they're doing and how much damage they have wrought, they are way behind schedule. And they're behind schedule because there's more resistance than they thought they would be. People are more organized against this, even though we could be a lot more organized than we are. We have been organized enough to slow them down. Lawsuits have been more successful at slowing them down, even though the Supreme Court, I call them the corrupt Supremes. So even though I feel like the Supreme Court is on side with this, lower courts are certainly slowing them down a lot. So Those are things to feel positive about. Doesn't mean we can rest, doesn't mean we can stop working, doesn't mean we can stop resisting, doesn't mean we can say, I'm going to check out of this and enjoy the holidays. But we do have things to feel hopeful about because they are very far behind schedule.
Yeah, and you said in your piece, and this resonated with me a lot, that success can't be an excuse to quit, right? It should actually be motivating to fight harder. I want to go through some of the things that they haven't done yet, and then talk about. You have a nice sort of coda at the end about what we need to do and how to proceed further. But also, and then I kind of, as we go through this list, I want to talk about some of the reasons we think that our resistance has been successful, because I think there's a few ways to think about some of this stuff. But first, tell us about their failure to change the Department of Health and Human Services. I didn't realize they wanted to call it the Department of Life.
Oh yes, that was a big objective.
Oof.
They proposed changing the name of the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Life. It's mentioned multiple times in the HHS section of Project 2025, which for review was written in large part by Roger Severino, who is an Opus Dei Catholic cult extremist who has done multiple things to erode the separation of church and state in this country for close to 2 decades. So he's extremely radicalized, and his goal was to call it the Department of Life. Maybe they think the optics of calling it the Department of Life would be really terrible, considering that they're destroying vaccines and destroying biomedical research grants and setting us back decades, if not centuries, on that front, and promoting quack theories about health. And honestly, it makes my blood boil, some of them do, to hear people like Mark Wayne Mullen talk about how people just need to stop drinking and chewing and smoking and live cleaner lives, and then they wouldn't be so sick. That comes directly from Christian nationalism, where my pastor as a child would say, I don't cuss, drink, smoke, chew, or go to the movies with girls that do. So it's very much
oh my God.
a Christian nationalist theme that if you just didn't participate in all these vices, then you wouldn't have health problems. So, they haven't managed to change the name, probably because it would just be so ridiculous on so many fronts to now call that the Department of Life. But there's another reason that I mentioned that they can't do that yet, and it's because so much of that was tied to their goal to ban abortion nationwide from conception. And they have failed to do that. That doesn't mean they aren't working hard. That doesn't mean they aren't succeeding on some fronts. Doesn't mean they won't keep trying. But one of the things that I think we should be encouraged by is the abortion abolitionist movement, which is an extreme movement of anti-abortion people who want to see women who have failed pregnancies be charged with murder and be subject to the death penalty, have come out and exposed all their crazy and all their radicalization and all their extremism very publicly, and probably have jumped the gun proposing laws. I mean, the law in South Carolina did not pass, and I predicted it would. So there was enough resistance in South Carolina to defeat one of these initiatives by the abortion abolitionist movement. So they probably jumped the gun and exposed just how extreme they are, which is helping more Americans wake up and see what a threat this is. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
If Americans can use it that way.
I think, abortion is such an interesting, it feels like a centerpiece of a strategy. I think it's that thing that kind of broke through to the mainstream in the 70s and 80s and 90s and beyond, that, was a way to say, you don't have to be a Christian fundamentalist to believe that we shouldn't murder babies, right? It's a gateway drug into that kind of fundamentalism. And I saw, having grown up in Kansas, real center for a lot of the battles and the, protests and what was it called? The Summer of Life or something. There were crazy protests in Wichita and all across. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds with that, but Kansas was, a progressive state historically, right? We were added as a counterbalance to the slave states, and we still hate Missouri, mostly because it's just garbage, but but also because it was a slave state. I mean, that, it goes back that far, and we fought for big progressive causes. We were, we were fiery, despite being Kansas. But in any case, I think they used that sort of spirit on us and on Americans who felt like they were helpless to enact change, and said, look, this is your new battle. You get to make a difference in this space. And I think that it's worth noting that they haven't banned abortion totally yet, but they'll never give up, right?
They'll never give up, but they had done such a good job for decades of masking their extreme religious Christian nationalist rhetoric and language behind this more inclusive, don't you want to get on board with this?
Right.
We want to work together, and this is something that we can do together, kind of almost kumbaya presentation to the public. And now these abortion abolitionists are taking their masks off and saying just every conceivable extreme position that they believe 100% should be implemented, including, putting women to death and people who help them get abortions to death. So that kind of talk doesn't have as many Americans going, wow, maybe I should get on board with that.
Well, I think
so hopefully it will help more Americans see what this has been all along, because this is always what they've been. They've just kept it hidden, and now they're not hiding it, and that they're arrogant enough to think that they've won enough to not hide it anymore is a weakness that we can exploit, that we should be doubling and tripling down on to try to defeat them.
And I think that, I don't know what you think about this, and I don't know what I think about it exactly, except that, abortion as a sort of rallying cry is really effective when you're fighting against the bigs. You're the David to the Goliath of the baby killers and all of this. But once you start making, headway in that space, when you start actually enacting these laws, the broader population starts seeing the everyday effects of this on women and families, and it's horrifying. It's not a good look. I think it works better as something, as a fight that you will never win, right? Because once you win it, then you have to live with those consequences. And I think, a lot of those I wonder if a lot of the failures of what we're talking about today come from that. Just the optics of like, whoa, this is terrible. and you said one other thing, DEI should be illegal. That's another thing they failed at doing. And again, the optics of making DEI illegal feel kind of dumb. Like why are we making DEI illegal?
Especially since millions of Americans approve of the civil rights movement.
Yes.
And the feminist movement, and want to see want to live in a country where we really are all equal.
Yes.
So, their argument against DEI is that it advantages some people against others and doesn't give true equality.
Right.
When really they're just mad that white people aren't getting the same opportunities that they used to. Yep. So, it's a reverse discussion of what equality should be. But, it's comforting, and we should take heart to see that there are millions and millions of Americans, including institutions and big companies like Costco, who are saying, no, we're not going back to that. We believe all people are equal, and we are going to keep these DEI initiatives in place, and we don't care how much you persecute us or talk about us or threaten us.
Right.
So those companies and institutions and individuals who are taking a stand for that really matter. Making DEI illegal, getting it out of every space, was something that was very prominent in Project 2025 that they have not accomplished. They have accomplished a lot, but they have not succeeded in having it be totally an illegal and dead issue by now. So that's positive.
It is positive. And, again, I feel like it's, so much of this is just, rallying cry. It's like, Mark Wayne is a good boogeyman for us because he's dummy, but, like trans athletes, we have to fight against this. We have to, the DEI, it's ruining everything. And once you realize the scapegoat is just a scapegoat, right? It's not the real root of your problem. It loses power. And let's take tariffs next, because that was another cornerstone of this project, implementing tariffs and figuring out how to do it, and all of this, that, and the other. But it's another thing that when the rubber hits the road, you're like, well, everything is way more expensive now, and the farmers don't sell their product, their crops abroad anymore because nobody wants to buy that. Like, why is this? So what happened to tariffs?
Well,
and also, why was it such a big cornerstone of Project 2025? That's something I'm not understanding.
Project 2025 spilled a lot of ink talking about tariffs and talking about different ways to implement tariffs. Project 2025 focused on China, which almost 100% of the time used the words communist China to talk about China as our biggest enemy. It didn't specify putting tariffs on basically the whole world, including islands in the Southern Atlantic Ocean who don't even have inhabitants and whatever. They spelled out different business reasons to have tariffs, primarily focused on undercutting China. But the regime just came in and basically threw spaghetti at the wall and said, oh, this design, I'm going to read the stain and, put together a tariff plan that, and announce it, and then change it every other day for months, and make it so, they didn't really stick to the plan that was laid out in Project 2025, because tariffs are something that the president really, really, really cares about. So because the president really cares about tariffs, he doesn't leave that piece of it to his co-presidents, Russ Vought and Stephen Miller and other people. He wants to have a say. And so because he wants to have a say, there's always going to be chaos in that say. So that's what's happened with it. And it's given a lot of Americans who voted for this a real sense of how they voted against their own interests. Is it enough Americans that are angry about it to make real change yet? No. But the more this goes on, the more the economy is going to suffer, and more Americans are going to be impacted by that. And that is only going to hurt Republicans, because Americans have historically thought that Republicans were the only people who knew how to have economic success. And we're going to see that that's absolutely not true. It's not true. And we have lots of data that shows that it's not true, but the vibes are that it's true. So this will kill those vibes.
Yeah, it does.
Hopefully for a long time.
I mean, this party is all about vibes. And the thing is, I think we talk about Project 2025 every week. It's everywhere. And I think it all boils down to why Project 2025 is bad is because it's just a book full of terrible ideas. Right? Like that's what it comes down to. And so it does kind of make sense that once you implement these terrible ideas, they become unpopular. They're terrible ideas. They're bad ideas. Nobody wants this except for a few people.
Another thing to feel positive about, and this isn't in my piece, but it's another part of it. One of the reasons the regime kind of panicked a couple of months ago in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death was because they thought they'd be done with this by now.
Right.
They thought they would have consolidated enough power to categorically start locking up their enemies and start demanding that certain people not be on the airways and start shutting down groups like Lincoln Square without consequences. They thought they'd be to that point and they weren't. And so rather than take a step back and learn from what they didn't do to get there, they just panicked, in my view, and started being more aggressive and more assertive and doing things that made Americans who maybe weren't paying a lot of attention to this start paying attention for the first time. So, that was another misstep they made, I think, that continues to have repercussions. You had Curtis Yarvin, who was, the architect of this techno state thing, saying,
right.
I'm going to Europe to live because this is such a failure. You've had Peter Thiel sell a lot of his Palantir shares because this hasn't gone the way they hoped it would. That's not to say that they can't still succeed.
Right.
That's not to say that they haven't still wreaked a lot of havoc and caused a lot of damage that's probably going to last for decades. But they are not where they hope to be by now.
Yeah.
And that is a weakness that we can exploit.
And absolutely. And I think, to the extent that abortion was a sort of underdog issue, it feels good to be the underdog. And for some reason, the American, ethos has always been, we're the underdog. We're fighting against the great British Empire, and clearly we're not the underdogs, right? But those of us now fighting against Project 2025, and these people are, I mean, we hold very little power. And yet here we are, we're making strides. The lower courts are holding, as we talked about, contraception. This is another one that they've kind of failed at. And I don't, they wanted to ban all contraception, which is crazy. It's a wild thing to do, just considering how fundamental contraception is to our culture and society, right? And not because we're free, love, living people, but our economy depends on the current birth rate, on people being able to work and live their lives and make these decisions. Like everything depends on our ability to control how many offspring we produce, right? So
it's another example of their extremism. They didn't wait long enough to take their masks off.
Right.
We won in November. It was a mandate. We need to stop all this contraception, this fornication, this illicit sex, these women just spreading their legs for anybody and having sex without consequences. We need to stop all that, and we need to take this away from people and just force people to use the fertility awareness-based methods, which we did a whole
We did.
show on
You
several
guys should go
months
back
ago
and
about
watch it. It was really good.
how that's really just, when is the best time for me to try to get pregnant? So, that them bringing that out now is also jumping the gun, and is causing people who can be pregnant especially to pay more attention to this and go, wait a minute. I never thought that my birth control pill would be in jeopardy. That's just
Right.
not something I ever envisioned. What in the world is happening? And so more Americans are starting to pay attention to this now because they took their masks off and revealed that they're crazy, that they actually think the birth control pill causes abortions.
Right.
Which is scientifically not true, but they believe that and teach that. I mean, I couldn't do that in Christian nationalism as a teenager because my mom told me it caused abortion. So this is a long time story that they've been telling amongst themselves. But, they made the mistake of wanting to tell it to everybody and force it on everybody. So that is a talking point with anyone who can be pregnant that is still very much something that could be galvanizing.
Yeah.
For more Americans to say, this is in danger, but they haven't succeeded in getting rid of it yet, and maybe you should care about this.
Well, I know that, it's not just that, but, the pill is a lifesaver for so many women who have irregular or, terrible symptoms every month. It is not just about not getting pregnant. It's really
Right.
about so many more things. And so imagine some shit man saying, no, this thing that makes you able to live your life, you can't. You need to suffer. And that's it. Also, we've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
They do want you to suffer. And now we're realizing that is true.
Yeah. And it's nice to see, anytime I help people use that language to talk about these issues, it makes me feel good. So thank you for parroting that language.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think that, the last thing that we should talk about on the list of things they haven't done, or the positives anyway, are that more people are talking about Christian nationalism. And that's a real testament to you and your Substack and your newsletter, and shows like this, and media is starting to pick up on it. And look, it's also becoming harder and harder to ignore because, like you said, they took their masks off too soon.
Right.
We know what they're trying to do, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, and I mean, every time watching the discussion of the Phoenix Declaration in Florida and the people who were coming up to the microphone saying this is just full of Christian nationalism and signing examples of it was really gratifying for me.
Yeah.
Because, it's not just my work, but some of it came from my work that they were able to do that.
Yes.
And so we need a lot more of that kind of thing out there to give people talking points to fight stuff like this, which I continue to do on my Substack, and am coming up with more resources to help people with that, because the Phoenix Declaration got passed in Florida, but it won't stop there. So that's gratifying to see mainstream corporate outlets have people write about religious extremism and Christian extremism now. They don't do it nearly strongly enough.
No.
But we are starting to see it more. We are starting to see them go there a little bit, which was before just this untouchable third rail that they would not breach. So those things are positive. And I think it's important to tell Americans, when you see these things, let people know you're grateful they're putting them out there. When you see an article like that in a mainstream publication like The Atlantic or whatever, let them know, I appreciate the fact that you're covering this. This is a crisis, and we need a lot more articles like this.
Yeah.
They listen to their subscribers, and will put more things out there that they think their subscribers want to read. And
you guys got to subscribe to Andra's Substack. I plug it every week, but I feel it so deeply. And if you can become a paid subscriber, you oughta. It is well worth it, and it's not just worth it because the Atlantic can afford to continue paying its staff and doing all of this, but it supports Andra and this message. And, it is vital that we get this word out. I think that, as we kind of close here, I want to talk about just a couple of things to keep in mind that you posted in your post, which I thought were really resonated with me. First is that we have to remember setbacks don't phase these people. They don't. This, like you mentioned, this project started in 1973, right? That's 52 years ago. That is a long time. Clearly, they have a trajectory, and I feel like they think they've come to the promised land now. But if they haven't, they don't care. They'll keep trucking away.
Right. So we celebrate our wins, and then we go out and double and triple down on defeating them the next day.
Yes.
That's something that the left has historically not done. It's, we won. And now we can just relax. No, these people never stop. They never relax. So we can't either. We need to acknowledge that we're winning on some fronts and celebrate together and take time off when we need it, and then get back up and keep fighting, because they never stop.
Take those wins and build on them. And that's why also every local election matters. And, in my little town, anytime there's a Christian nationalist or a weirdo who's been posting stuff on Facebook who's running for office, word spreads like wildfire. But it doesn't do that in every district, every city, every town, every rural area. You get to know your candidates and run, right?
Run and
Even
go
if
to
you're
public
gonna lose,
meetings.
Run.
Yeah. Run everywhere and go to public meetings and groups. Because, my husband is a former local official. And I can tell you from more than a decade of experience watching that, most of those people cave to the loudest voice and the biggest voices in the room.
Yep.
So if you're the loudest voice with the biggest group in the room, you have a bigger chance of getting them to go along with you. At the local level, it's just really hard for them to ignore you when they're going to see you at the grocery store and at the gas station and it's harder to. So go to these meetings, organize, be a big group, and be louder than them.
Yeah.
And you'll get you'll make more headway at the local level. That's really how the bill in South Carolina was defeated. So many people showed up to rail against that bill in a blood red state that they defeated it. So this can happen, but you have to show up and you have to be loud and you have to be a big enough group for them to say, maybe we can't do this today.
And I think, we talk about how, or I said, Project 2025 is essentially just a book of bad ideas. They don't think they're bad ideas. They think they're terrific ideas, right? Right. But we need to let them know that's not true. We don't think they're good ideas. We think they're terrible ideas, and we're not going to have it. And I think to that end, you mentioned the last thing in your piece was that we need to stop thinking in the past and we need to start thinking ahead. And I think that is, you can take that a few ways. And in my opinion, you can plan for your strategy going ahead. You can, plan to run in elections. You can door knock. You can do all of those things. But also, I think it's important to think about the world you want to live in, because that is how the Christian nationalists have succeeded this whole time. Is they've had a vision for this paradise that they're building, and it is right, and it is what they
hellscape that they want to.
It's a total hellscape. Yeah. And they keep that in their vision and they work towards that. So think about this. What is it you're working towards?
Yeah.
What do you want this world to look like?
That is not a mindset that Americans have.
No.
We don't value that kind of thinking. So it's a challenge to even spend 5 or 10 minutes a day imagining the world we want.
Yes.
And thinking about how to get there. But I encourage everybody here to do that, because we're never going to get there if we keep doing what we've been doing and expecting a different result.
Exactly. Well, Andra, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. Really nice after, all this year of craziness. Next week, we'll get back to the bad news.
Maybe not. Maybe we'll
Maybe
have more
not.
good news to talk about.
I bet there will
I
be.
can be hopeful for that. And
We'll
if
find
not, we'll
some.
be here talking about something.
Yeah, we'll find some good news to talk about. Well,
Okay.
everyone, thank you. And everyone subscribe to Andra Substack. Subscribe to Lincoln Square if you're not subscribed already. If you can join as a paid sub, love it. You support the work and you're a part of the team. All right. See you next week, Andra.
Bye.
Thanks.